It all started on what was supposed to be a quiet day at my ranch. The sun was out, the fields stretched wide and peaceful, and I thought I was finally going to enjoy some time away from the usual noise of the city. But then, out of nowhere, my peace was interrupted by a loud knock on the gate. Standing there was someone I'd seen around before, the neighbor everyone whispered about, the one who seemed to think she ran the whole community. Around here, they called her the HOA enforcer, but most people just called her Karen. She stood at my gate, clipboard in hand, demanding to be let inside my property. According to her, as a member of the Homeowners Association, she had the right to inspect my land and issue fines for anything she didn't like. The thing was, my ranch didn't even fall under her HOA rules. When I told her she wasn't allowed in, she didn't just leave. Instead, she snapped. She waved her papers in the air, shouting about violations and penalties. And then, out of nowhere, she handed me a notice claiming I owed the HOA $3,000 in fines. I laughed at first, thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. But she was dead serious. Her voice grew sharper, her face redder, and soon her threats got louder. She told me if I didn't pay up, she'd call the sheriff herself. Little did she know I had no intention of backing down, and I had my own way of handling things. That's when the tension reached a breaking point, and the sheriff actually showed up. But what happened next on my land was something none of us could have predicted. The sheriff's truck rolled slowly up the long dirt drive, its tires crunching against the gravel as the sun glared off the windshield. My heart sank, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I knew Karen had managed to drag the law into something that wasn't even within her authority. She stood tall at the gate, almost smug, like she had finally gotten the upper hand. Clipboard pressed to her chest. She whispered something under her breath and gave me that look, the kind of look that said she was already celebrating a victory that wasn't hers. As the sheriff stepped out, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud, he adjusted his hat and looked between us. I could tell right away he was sizing up the situation. Karen wasted no time rushing over to him, waving her papers like they were gold. She went on about violations, fees, and how my ranch fell under her jurisdiction. Her voice carried through the quiet air, sharp and overbearing. Meanwhile, I stood back, calm but firm, waiting for my chance to explain. The truth was simple. My ranch had been in my family for decades, long before any HOA was ever formed in the area. The property lines were clear, the deeds were solid, and her authority ended at the edge of her neighborhood. Still, Karen was determined to twist the story. She told the sheriff I was refusing inspections, ignoring rules, and even suggested I was a danger to the community. The sheriff didn't say much at first. He just kept listening, watching, and jotting notes in his little pad. The silence between his questions stretched longer than I liked, and I couldn't tell which way he was leaning. All I knew was that Karen's grin kept getting wider, as if she believed the law was already on her side. But deep down, I had the feeling this battle was just getting started. The sheriff finally turned his attention to me, his eyes steady as he asked for my side of the story. I told him plainly that my ranch was private property, not governed by any HOA rules, and that Karen had no legal right to demand entry or issue fines. I even offered to show him the original deeds, documents that had been in my family for generations. But before I could finish, Karen cut me off, raising her voice and insisting that I was lying, that I was trying to hide violations from her authority. What made things more complicated was the fact that this wasn't the first time she had pulled something like this in the area. I'd heard from other neighbors that she had a reputation for pushing her power beyond her borders, threatening folks with fines, and even scaring new homeowners into thinking she could take their land. Most people avoided a fight and just paid her off to keep the peace. That was her pattern, but she hadn't met someone who would stand firm against her. Not until now. The sheriff, still calm, asked Karen where exactly in her documents it said my land fell under her HOA. She fumbled for a second, flipping pages, but quickly regained her composure and claimed there were special clauses that allowed oversight of surrounding properties. I knew that wasn't true, but the way she delivered it made me realize just how far she was willing to go to protect her illusion of control. As the minutes stretched on, I noticed more of the local neighbors slowing their cars at the end of the drive, watching the standoff unfold. Word was spreading fast, and what started as a private dispute was turning into something bigger, something that could shake the entire community. And the sheriff, caught in the middle, was about to make a decision that could change everything. The air grew heavier as the sheriff stood there, flipping through the stack of papers Karen shoved into his hands. The crowd of neighbors at the end of the drive had grown larger, their curious whispers floating across the field. Some leaned against their cars, others shaded their eyes with their hands, all waiting to see how this strange battle over property lines and HOA power would end. I could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on me, but I wasn't about to back down. Karen paced the gravel like she owned it, her heels grinding into the dirt. She kept pointing toward my barn, the fence line, even the old shed my grandfather built decades ago, as if every piece of my ranch was evidence of some grand violation. Her voice rose with each accusation, and for the first time, the sheriff raised a hand to quiet her. The silence that followed was sharp, almost uncomfortable, but it made her scowl deepen. I could tell she was desperate now, and desperation made her dangerous in a different way. She wasn't just trying to find me anymore. She wanted to prove to the entire neighborhood that she had control. Her clipboard, once a tool, had become a weapon of intimidation, and she used it with practiced precision. Every word out of her mouth was meant to corner me, to force me into giving up something that wasn't hers to take. The sheriff asked me once again to confirm that I had documentation proving my ranch stood outside her HOA. I nodded firmly, but before I could step away to retrieve it, Karen lunged forward, shouting that I was hiding evidence, that I couldn't be trusted. The sheriff's hand dropped his belt, the crowd gasped, and in that frozen moment, it felt like the whole standoff was about to explode. Before the sheriff could respond to Karen's outburst, another truck pulled up behind the crowd. The engine rumbled low, and when the door swung open, I recognized the county land surveyor stepping out with a folder tucked under his arm. The neighbors murmured, surprised to see him there. It turned out one of them, tired of Karen's constant bullying, had called him earlier that week to clear up property boundaries once and for all. His arrival shifted the energy instantly, and for the first time, Karen's confident expression flickered. The surveyor walked straight toward us, greeting the sheriff with a nod before turning to me. "I've been reviewing these parcels," he said, tapping his folder, "and there's something here you both need to see." Karen immediately cut in, claiming she already knew the lines, insisting his work was unnecessary. But the sheriff silenced her with a look and gestured for him to continue. The surveyor opened the folder and revealed a set of maps, some dating back decades. He explained how the HOA's expansion years earlier had been sloppily documented, leaving a gray area that Karen had been exploiting. Technically, my ranch sat well outside the HOA's reach, but the twist was that a small strip of shared access road cut through the edge of my land, creating a legal overlap Karen was desperate to control. Gasps rippled through the crowd as he pointed to the map. Karen's eyes lit up, and she seized on the detail like it was her golden ticket. She started shouting that the overlap gave her full authority to regulate my property, even more than before. The sheriff's jaw tightened, the neighbors leaned closer, and suddenly the stakes were higher than ever. What had begun as a simple boundary dispute was now a community battle that threatened to pull everyone into the conflict. The sheriff studied the surveyor's map in silence, his brow furrowed as he traced the boundary lines with his finger. Karen's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant, claiming the overlap gave her full rights over my ranch. But before she could push further, the sheriff finally spoke, his tone firm and steady. He explained that the strip of road was indeed shared access, but it did not give the HOA authority over the ranch itself. The road could be used for passage, nothing more. The weight of his words fell heavy, and the crowd murmured in agreement. Karen's face twisted, her confidence slipping as the sheriff turned to her directly. He reminded her that making false claims and attempting to enforce fines outside her jurisdiction could carry consequences. For the first time all day, she was quiet, clutching her clipboard like a shield. The neighbors whispered louder now, emboldened by the sheriff's clarity. Some even stepped closer, sharing their own stories of being harassed by Karen and her endless violations. I thought that was the end of it, that the matter was finally settled. But then the surveyor added one more detail that stunned everyone. While the ranch was safe from the HOA, the records revealed that the very strip of road Karen had been trying to use as leverage wasn't technically HOA property either. It belonged to the county, which meant her entire claim of control was built on nothing at all. The sheriff's eyes narrowed as he processed this, and the neighbors erupted in disbelief. Karen, pale and furious, tried to argue but stumbled over her own words. The power she had clung to for so long collapsed in a single moment. And just when it seemed the crowd had turned against her completely, Karen made one last desperate move that no one saw coming. Karen's last desperate move wasn't a shout or another fine. It was her storming off down the road, clutching her clipboard as if it could still protect her. The crowd of neighbors watched in silence, some shaking their heads, others exchanging knowing looks. It was clear her grip on the community had finally broken. For years, people had quietly tolerated her overreach, afraid of her threats and endless notices, but now the truth was out in the open. She no longer had the sheriff's backing, the surveyor's maps exposed her lies, and the neighbors had seen enough to never let her intimidate them again. The sheriff turned to me, apologizing for the trouble and assuring me that the HOA had no legal grounds to interfere with my ranch. He also made it clear that if Karen tried to push her false authority again, there would be real consequences. The surveyor handed me a certified copy of the updated boundary records, a permanent reminder that my family's land was secure. That small strip of county road, the very thing Karen thought gave her power, was now proof that she had none at all. As the neighbors slowly dispersed, many stopped to thank me for standing firm. Some admitted they had been too afraid to confront her before, worried about retaliation. But now they saw it was possible to push back, and that made them feel stronger as a community. Later that evening, I sat on my porch, looking out across the fields. The ranch was quiet again, the peace restored. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, but it carried a lesson worth remembering. Sometimes standing your ground doesn't just protect your own rights, it frees others from the weight of fear. And for me, that was worth every moment of the fight.